The Ritual. The dark landmass on the horizon yearned to touch the deep purple of night above it, but try as it might, stretching from one end of the world to the other, a line of deep magenta cut the two like a slithering flatworm, forbidding them to embrace. It would linger there until the black of night took hold and the stars shone, refusing to reveal the secrets between them. Cale breathed deep the sharp air of twilight. The time had finally come. Years of research and sacrifice, both metaphorical and literal, led to this moment. He would finally get to do his own research, gain access to the oldest and most sacred of the dread praises, study the most consecrated and profane incantations of the fourth sect. His induction as a full member of the Black Gnarl would take place tomorrow evening when that holy band sat once more on the horizon. Tonight, a lucky few would undertake the ritual first. One more mundane clerical task was handed to him. After tomorrow, he would be doling out such trivial matters to others. Perhaps he'd receive an acolyte of his own to pander to his simpler needs, whilst he was busy furthering the greater purpose of the order. He briskly walked across the worn stones of the castle's main bailey. Old tattered banners hung from the keep and main corner towers. The smaller turrets had pennants of similar disheveled quality whipping in the wind. The Black Gnarl currently had bigger plans than holding castles and territory, so they left the old heraldry of the once glorious Promise Hold where it was. The security and ample rooms provided by the location were its real value to the order. Other black-robed members of the Gnarl were scattered about various parts of the grounds, like wraiths haunting old ruins. A few individuals didn't wear the robes. There were very, very few of these types. All were speaking in inaudible tones with their contacts within the order. They served some purpose or another, but their time here was always brief, and they were never left alone. None ever made it past the main bailey, let alone the gatehouse to the inner corridors of the hold. Not even Cale was allowed to venture beyond the basement level. He sighed, wondering what awaited below. He'd find out after his final initiation rites. The deeper parts of Promise Hold were the topics of rumor and myth among the Gnarl's acolytes. To the Order's guests and collaborators, they were the subject of fearful conjecture. Such power was a valuable commodity. Many nights were spent around simple dinners with his fellows, discussing things they'd heard, and the slightest glimpses of what awaited those who passed their ritual initiation. The followers of the many-faced worm were secretive even among other denominations of the Black Gnarl. Their own acolytes knew that knowledge of their god and the powers it so closely withheld and cautiously relinquished in jealous trickles to its followers was only meted out to those who were worthy. Those that were not were never seen nor spoken of ever again. You entered the gatehouse an acolyte, nameless and ignorant, and emerged a brother or sister of the order, or not at all. You remained nameless and were forgotten. Who knew what else became of you? He arrived at the outbuilding to which he'd been summoned. The plain, square structure was attached to the western inner wall. The diamond symbol of the Black Gnarl was painted on the door, but was embellished further with a worm-like serpent with several screaming faces circling it. This was the symbol of his denomination. Cale knocked and waited patiently. "Enter," came a loud and firm reply. The old door creaked open. Inside, the room smelled of paper, ink, and wax. Books, both old and new, were stacked in piles of many sizes. Lit candles created orbs of dancing yellow light in seemingly random places. A cluster sat, melting on top of an old but well-maintained desk. A black blob of a man sat at the desk, writing. His robe stretched over his large, meaty shoulders, his quill scratching endlessly on a page before him. Many different pages lay scattered and piled atop one another on the desk. How he knew which one to write on was a mystery to Cale. One of the pages contained a sketch of their denomination's patron god. It was crude and undefined, as most depictions were. The words of one of the Order's masters echoed in his memory. To see the great worm is to see death, to taste madness, to hear unfiltered despair. It was taught to all acolytes that this was meant to be a trial. To receive the blessings of their god, they must be able to bask in his presence. More would be revealed as they passed one initiation and on to the next, those who were strong and worthy passing into higher echelons of their god's favor. The hooded head looked up and a soft-featured, many-chinned face was exposed by the candlelight. Small but intelligent eyes peered back at Cale. "You summoned me, Master Bolthus?" Cale asked. The round, baby-faced historian and record-keeper squinted at the acolyte as though he didn't recognize him. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, causing his jowls to shake. "Yes, acolyte," Brother Bolthus said in a bored tone. Cale wasn't even worthy of having his name mentioned as an acolyte. "I need you to deliver this to Master Dunscale." He reached under the haphazard pile of papers and pulled out a folded letter sealed with wax. The seal bore the Order's diamond symbol with the embellishment of his denomination. This letter was from some other chapter of the Black Gnarl elsewhere in the world. Cale saw the dark, curling tattoos on Bolthus's hand, denoting him as a full initiate. The same tattoos that would be written on Cale's own hands soon. Master Dunscale was among the inner circle, the lead diplomat of Cale's denomination who assisted in turning any remaining cities and leaders to the Order's agenda and dealing with other branches of the Black Gnarl. He was often away, and even when present at the hold, would rarely interact with the acolytes. Why Cale was summoned to deliver a message to him was puzzling, but he wouldn't dare decline. "You'll need this." Bolthus grabbed something off the other side of the table. It was a tarnished silver disc roughly the size of Cale's palm. His Order's symbol was, however, on this disc. It would allow him passage into the deeper halls. In the case of a silver pass, he could go as far as the second subfloor. Cale took both the letter and the pass, placing them in a pocket within his robes. He felt the weight of the disc pulling the cloth against his shoulders and sash. He felt a tiny thrill at the anticipation that he would see past the first floor. The record-keeper squinted his puffy eyes at Cale. Cale realized he was smiling. Repressing the grin on his own face and apologizing for delaying, Cale left Bolthus to his work. Returning to the Bailey, he saw the time of day drew closer to tonight's initiation. If he hurried, he might even catch a glimpse of the new full-fledged brothers and sisters, or even hear some of the ceremony. The gatehouse, set in a secondary, smaller wall surrounding the keep, opened for him as soon as he stepped within 10 feet of it. Cale looked up and saw the black, yawning windows where the gatekeeper saw him arrive. The courtyard that led to the first floor was nearly empty. Only a few shrouded figures meandered about the weed-clotted area. As he made his way inside the large, imposing stone heart of Promise Hold, the light of a dozen torches greeted him. The castle was old, even before the rupture, so few windows were present, and many torches, candelabras, and chandeliers were required to keep it lit. The greeting hall, at least that used to be its purpose, now served as a checkpoint for all who entered. A few guards were positioned here, the rare members who wore belts with sheathed swords on their hips. These were mostly for show, as their magic would be the first line of defense against any intruders. The swords were a badge of office of sorts. They ignored Cale, immediately recognizing him. After entering one of the open, arched doorways and arriving at a door that led to the first subfloor, however, one of the guards stopped him. He revealed the silver disc from within his robes and was allowed through. Cale took a deep breath. Even before his initiation rites, he would be graced with sights forbidden to him for years prior. He smiled again, anxious to see and hear what awaited. The door led directly to a hall, much like the rest of those in the castle. At the far end, however, a staircase trailed down into darkness. The stone used in its construction was different from those of the hall floors and walls. It was newer and less worn. This had been added after the Black Gnarl acquired the structure. The stairway was fairly short and stopped at an open doorway. The room beyond was built of the same stone as the stairway. Cale assumed from here on he would see all new rooms constructed strictly for the Order's use. A pair of guards swiftly approached him, but stepped aside after being shown the silver disc. Cale looked around and saw multiple large arched doorways in each direction. He realized he was so excited to see the lower levels he never asked exactly where Brother Dunscale was, or what floor. He hazarded a guess and went to the left. Multiple doors passed him by, all closed. They were heavy set, and he couldn't hear anything through them. The acolytes were only told the first floor consisted of a library, dormitory halls for new full initiates, and study rooms. It occurred to him that Brother Dunscale would have little reason to be here. He returned to the central room and decided to ask the guards where he might find the Black Gnarl diplomat. They instructed him to make for the third subfloor, the last the disc would allow him access to, and make for the center passageway. Brother Dunscale's study would be on the left. Thanking them, Cale went to the center arch, past the guards, and down the staircase. It wound back on itself, showing that at least the central rooms were directly atop one another. Cale repeated the same process as before, passing the guards with the disc and skipping the second floor altogether. Acolytes weren't told what this floor held, but it appeared much the same. So far, the trip into the underground levels of the Promise Hold, the soul of his Order's operations, was quite mundane. He felt deflated. He'd always held grand visions of what awaited beyond initiation. Stories of what the Black Gnarl had achieved in centuries past made them more than what they appeared to be. He'd hoped the drudgery of an acolyte's duties eventually led to something more glorious, more rapturous or euphoric. Perhaps the Black Gnarl was little more than an old religion that reached its prime during Alda's darkest hours. The world reached a new era, a dark and unenviable one for many, but his order had profited and grown as a result, just like many religions from before. The idea curdled his ambitions and excitement. The Black Gnarl offered the best prospects that Cale had seen, but he truly hoped for more than waiting out these awful days in a dark, repurposed monastery. When he passed through the threshold into the third-floor central room, however, everything changed. This floor was different. There was only one hallway here, directly in front of him. On the right was a large lift attached to a pulley system. Currently, the lift was in use, and a gaping black hole waited with ropes leading down into the darkness. On the left, a large alcove contained the effigy of his denomination, a scaled, powerful worm beast with countless faces protruding from its body. It was impossible to tell where it began and where it ended. Cale's breath caught. He'd seen crude drawings of the being and read multiple descriptions, but never before had he seen something so lifelike and of such scale. It looked like it was about to crawl, writhing and horrifying, out of the alcove and come claim him at that very moment. It seemed to move before his eyes, and sounds escaped every mouth on every face. Faces within faces, and mouths within mouths. Eyes peered from every angle, covering the squirming shape like a pox. Cale swallowed, his throat dry and aching. He barely noticed the lone guard, a towering specter, approach him with ethereal grace. This one had a sword sheathed on their belt and held a staff in their hand. Around their neck was a gold pendant, large and circular, bearing the embellished symbol belonging to that twilight worm. He showed the silver disc once more, but the guard remained, the face below the dark hood fully cloaked in shadow, unlike the others whose faces were at least mostly revealed and could be confirmed as human. This towering being only left such conclusions as a wild guess. It moved so unnaturally, made no sound other than the shuffling of its flaccid robes, and loomed over Cale by a head and shoulder. As slow as the crawl of death, it turned to the side and back toward the alcove. It didn't even answer when he asked where he could find Master Dunscale. The guard may as well have been another statue in the room. He looked back at the pitch-black pit and stared for several moments. Subtle sounds drifted on stale air that wafted from the opening. They sounded unpleasant, but were so faint and muffled that it could have been his imagination working in tandem with the frightening aura pulsing from the sculpture. He could feel eyes boring into him from the hidden face of the sinister guard as well. A sense of urgency pricked his chest, and he decided against any further questions. He left through the only door available, in actuality a set of double doors of iron-reinforced wood. Pushing one open on its moaning hinges, he entered a hallway that split into a dozen different directions. Some were wider and more well-lit than others. The intimidating guard probably thought that if he was down this far in the subfloors, he knew where he was going. However, Cale was little more than a messenger with no clear direction to Master Dunscale. A slight oversight, it seemed. He then entered the large centermost hallway and found it contained no other entrances. Slight ruts were worn into the stones. They led to the end of the hall, where another deep black pit awaited. This one was a more natural shape than the previous pit. There was no pulley-operated lift system here. Only a dark, unblinking eye in the depths below promise hold. It had the look of a subterranean tunnel that had been here for a very long time. Circular holes cut into the natural stone of the pit's walls alongside shallow, knife-straight striations. Something had cut and dug along here, but the holes, they looked as though they had been chewed into the rock. The hairs on his neck prickled and his skin broke into gooseflesh. The darkness in the pit was sourced from more than a lack of light. A visceral evil came from its gullet. He felt himself being watched as he peered over the edge, not watched by the guard in the previous room, but from something very deep down below. In his soul, Cale knew that something down there waited, watched, and wanted him. He felt his stomach lurch and he backed up, a fear of falling, grabbing his bowels and squeezing. Solid ground felt wonderful. He nearly tripped over his robes, backing away from the pit. Turning away and refusing to look back, Cale tried another hallway. Each door had some variation of the embellished Black Gnarl symbol, but each worm-like portion of the symbol was slightly different. At the end of the hall, a closed door awaited that had the worm symbol embellishment colored in red. This was a stark contrast compared to every other he'd seen. This had to be the office of a master. The door was locked, so Cale knocked gently. No one answered, so he tried again, rapping his knuckles firmly on the door. After moments of silence, he backed away and noticed a round impression in the iron bracings of the door. It was roughly the size of his hand. He removed the disc from the pocket in his robes and placed it inside the impression. Not only a perfect fit, but something clicked as the disc settled into place. He turned it to the left and it didn't move, so he tried the right. It spun effortlessly, and soon a louder click resonated from deeper within whatever locking mechanism this was. He gave a gentle push, and the door creaked open. A unique smell came from the room, rank and cloying, along with a sickly sweet perfume odor. Weak torchlight flickered but cast its tortured light on nothing living or human within. Only things that scarred the mind and were better left undescribed. Cale closed the door and rested his head against it. He breathed slowly, forcing panic out of his mind. When his hands stopped shaking, he spun the lock back into place and removed the disc, resolving himself to not open any further doors unless someone called from behind them. In that regard, he tried other doors in the hallways, all without an answer to his attempts at knocking, and at times, when he thought he heard sounds or voices on the other side, he called out. More than once, the noise stopped at his interruption, but never started again by the time he moved on. One door after another, each hallway the same result. He feared he would have to return to Brother Bolthus and ask for clarification. After all this time wandering the subfloors, such an action would earn Cale a stern rebuke, possibly resulting in a delay of his time in the ritual. Though, after all he'd seen here, the shine had very much been taken off of that jewel. Fear and doubt crept into him, tarnishing his hopes and anticipations. Finally, he arrived at a door with muffled but audible voices on the inside. A man and woman were arguing in a manner suggesting they were both of the upper echelons, and quite immovable in their opinions. "Your little holdout here has been uncooperative for long enough," the woman said. Her voice was flat and stern. "Uncooperative? We merely have our own particular interest to pursue, in league with the higher purposes of the Order, of course. Ours simply requires a little more privacy and devotion than, say, the grand plans of the sons and daughters of Bakthul." The man's reply was now calmer than the agitated tone throughout Cale's approach. The woman's reply dripped with sarcasm. "Privacy and devotion? Your methods are questionable and unseemly at best. At worst, perverse and grotesque. The time's come to attract followers, supplicants, even soldiers. What you're doing here could prove contradictory to those efforts, Dunscale." Master Dunscale. Cale had finally found him. He thought to knock, but hesitated to interrupt the master and whomever his guest was. "No disrespect meant, my lady, but who is any member of the Black Gnarl to debate the tenets of any of the inheritors? The many-faced worm has its doctrine, its preferences. Don't lecture me, Dunscale." The woman interrupted, her voice barely carrying through the door. It was sharp as a sacrificial blade and coated with venom. "Look at me," she continued. Silence accompanied her demand. "Look at me, acolyte," she repeated harshly. A cold feeling crept out of the door and crawled over Cale. He knew to whom Master Dunscale was speaking. The Order would never have gotten far, especially holding to such secrecy over millennia, without hierarchy or discipline. There was only one within the Order titled the Crown of Night. He'd never met her, as few had. He didn't know who she was, but he knew what she was. At this moment, he realized he was happy with such ignorance. "Who am I?" she asked. Though the question seemed rhetorical, it was clear she wanted an answer. It took a few moments for Dunscale to answer. "The Crown of Night." He sounded sufficiently cowed. "And what are you?" "An acolyte in service to the great others, inheritors of the obscured throne." When she answered, her voice sounded pleased, like a mother who had received a proper answer from a scolded child. "Very good. We're all acolytes to them, nameless, meaningless, obedient." She placed noticeable emphasis on the final word. "You are blessed by your patron god. And I?" She stopped talking, and eventually it must have dawned on Master Dunscale that she wanted him to answer. He must have been seething in anger at the verbal lashing he was receiving. "Am blessed by them all," he said flatly, using all the begrudging respect he could muster. "As much a pitiful speck to them as you, but I have earned a multitude of their gifts, even survived yours, vulgar as it was." "You flirt with blasphemy," Dunscale rebuked, although he did so softly. The Crown of Night scoffed. "There's no blasphemy when they care not for our existence, nor even notice it. We deign to touch their unspeakable divinity and hope a sliver of a shard of their power graces us. Then we hope they notice when they claim everything as their own and allow us to carry on as insects in the dirt beneath their ruin as they walk our world. You would do well to remember that, Master Dunscale, amidst your zealotry." "My zealotry?" Dunscale said in a low voice. You mock my efforts. Yet how fares your probe of the northern city? The Crown of Knight's voice replied with a stern calmness that bespoke her refusal to give in to his baited argument. I continue to seek an appropriate route into Kolthov. The defenses born of the fifth magic there are unprecedented. Our own agents consistently fail to report back after venturing there, and my own efforts. Cale felt a prickle in the back of his neck. The muffled discussions beyond went silent. He raised his hand to knock when the Crown of Knights spoke again. We have a visitor. His heart stopped for a moment. Fear of reprisal, of the Crown of Knights' retribution, sapped the will to make his body move. He wanted to knock on the door and make their suspicion subside, but he only felt sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Enter, Master Dunscale barked. The irritation in his master's voice broke the stiffness in Cale's joints. He grasped the door handle and pushed, grunting when the hinges didn't move as easily as he expected. Inside, Master Dunscale sat at a large desk made of near black mahogany. Candles burned in tarnished holders, while books were stacked neatly atop each other on the sides. It was much more organized than the workspace of Brother Bolthus. Next to the desk stood the lady herself. Her robes looked to be made of soft velvet, dark as wine. Her cowl was down, and her hair fell against her shoulders like thick veins of gold running through fresh blood. She wore a gold chain around her neck with a symbol only vaguely familiar to him. It belonged to another of the inheritors, but not one Cale was overly knowledgeable of. Why are you here, acolyte? Dunscale asked pointedly. The words refused to materialize from his dry throat. Dunscale's bitter stare, coupled with the unexpected beauty and fearsome presence of the Crown of Night, was overpowering. He reached into his robes and removed the letter, feeling the paper in his fingers reminded him of his purpose, and he found some measure of strength there. Brother Bolthus said this came for you, Cale replied hoarsely. He cleared his throat and held out the letter. A sneer curled Dunscale's cracked lips. Of course that overfed toad couldn't be bothered to bring it to me himself. The lady smirked. Be nice. I like Brother Bolthus. He's harmless and dutiful, perfect for his position. She stepped towards him, her face returning to an unreadable mask. I'll take that, she said. The sleeves of her robe pulled away from her pale hand, which bore the tattoo of his denomination. A strange smell hung around her. It was cloying but sweet. He'd heard the blessed of the Sanguine Garden bear such an odor wherever they go. It was her eyes that were the worst. They hurt to look at and were a color Cale could not describe. She truly possessed the favor of each of the Ancient Ones. Each one that the Order knew of, that is. Possibly some they didn't. She pulled the letter open, the wax seal lifting from the page. As she unfolded the halves, Master Dunscale looked on with his eyes squinted in irritation. His liver-spotted, balding head turned a little redder. The wax seal with the symbol of the many-faced worm was obviously meant for his eyes. The Crown of Night always trumped a mere master, however. Her piercing eyes scanned the page. No sign of it being good or bad news crossed her face. Then she smirked and folded the letter back up, handing it over to Dunscale. You were to read it and inform me immediately upon my arrival. Dunscale took the letter with practiced obedience, but his eyes spoke of other, more volatile emotions. He read the letter more fully, taking his time. It felt to Cale as though they'd forgotten his presence. However, he didn't dare speak up. He was only a nameless apprentice after all. The masters have chosen to return to the island, Dunscale said, still looking at the letter. The lady subtly nodded, appearing disinterested. They were instructed to inform me of their decision. So be it. We'll coordinate with the other holds. We have quite the task ahead of us. Are we sure it's time? Dunskell asked, his scowl returning to his more normal sneer. We've made this mistake before. It was the lady's turn for her placid face to curdle. Gideon was an overzealous fool. Years of his efforts were destroyed because he became impatient and greedy. Years of our efforts destroyed. Nell Aldiri was a test run, we'll say. We were too lenient with the greater populace, but this time we'll maintain tighter control. Our numbers have grown since then, while the world continues to shrivel and decay. Make no mistake, Master Dunskell, that place is the locus of the Inheritor's power. The obscured throne's window into our world and its beacon to find it. Have Bolthus prepare letters for all the masters. We'll convene at my hold to discuss how to move forward. 2 weeks' time. Dunskell bowed his head stiffly. I'll have him start immediately. His head turned and a pair of cold brown eyes rested on Cale. You're still here, he grumbled, his voice as hollow as the fiendish pit down the other hall. Cale opened his mouth, but struggled to speak. His chin bobbed, making him look like a suffocating fish. Leave him be, old man, the Crown of Knights said with a hint of mirth in her voice. Cale's eyes darted over to see her approaching him. This man is the future of our organization. You may also call me my lady, she cooed. Her hand reached up and cupped his chin, and her eyes met his. Both her gaze and her touch hurt. Her look stung deep into his mind while her touch burned like a hot iron on his flesh. He whimpered. His hands trembled and he began to sweat again, but he did everything he could to not move or insult the Crown of Night. The compulsion to look in her eyes overwhelmed him as though she had some passive charm incantation constantly drifting about her. He couldn't resist. His eyes darted up, met hers, and he gritted his teeth against the pain. It was a sensation he lacked the poetic aptitude to describe. He felt naked in front of her, physically and spiritually. A moment of panic gripped him, knowing that any secrets he held, even those forgotten, were laid before her as his memories were stripped bare. A name whispered behind the barbed gauze that was being stuffed into his mind. The owner of the fingers that lovingly put it there. Janeska. She finally turned away, the greatest mercy he'd ever been granted. His eyes watered with hot tears. Blinking them away was even more painful. 1,000 razor-legged insects crawled over his mind. His jaw hurt from being clenched so tightly, fueled by the agony. Best of luck with your initiation tomorrow evening, Cale, she said, patting his cheek. You're going to need it. Yes, my lady, he barely managed to say aloud. He never mentioned his name. No acolyte would. What else had she seen when she looked at him? No, through him. She smirked, a slight chuckle coming from her throat. The Crown of Night, the grand leader of the Black Gnarl, both beautiful and horrible, pulled her cowl over her head and left the room. After the door clicked shut, an emotional sigh escaped the room itself. Master Dunskell ran a wrinkled hand over his mouth and chin. Cale felt near to soiling himself. Both remained quiet. Finally, Dunskell cleared his throat. Our divine lady, Janeska, Crown of Night. She's not without her charms, he said, his old voice hoarse. Yes, master, Cale replied emotionlessly, his words forced through his teeth. Huh, Dunskell grumbled. His quill scratched over a piece of paper for several moments. He sealed the letter and summoned Cale to the desk. Forcing his feet to move, Cale walked stiffly to the master's desk. He dared a glimpse at the organized papers on the top. Some appeared to be letters, while others showed diagrams and depictions of the human body in various states of duress. He swallowed, his mouth dry and throat hurting. The images contained notes and arrows and such of what Cale could only describe as medical and detailed in nature. He caught various words that, when coupled with the images, made it clear they involved the rituals of the many-faced worm. Cale felt his knees grow weak. Just when he thought he would need to lean on the master's desk to stay on his feet, his head swimming and the room suddenly feeling stifling beyond measure, Dunscale reached out with the letter, and in a gravelly voice and disinterested tone, ordered Cale to deliver it to Brother Bolthus straight away. The librarian was to draft copies for every master and send them out immediately. Cale bowed quickly and curtly, then immediately took his leave. The air in the subterranean hallways was somewhat cooler than the master's office. He realized that it was likely due to the cold drafts coming from the gaping mouth down the central corridor. He made his way back to the main room, where the stairway led back to the floor above. The fiendish guard remained in the same position. The statue in the alcove remained as menacing as ever. His eyes made their way over to the lift opposite the alcove. It called to him, faint sounds gliding in on the cold drafts wafting from down below. Like the eyes of the crown of night, he became entranced. A rhythm began to build in him. There was no music that he could hear. No rumbles or beats flowed through the ground or the walls. This came from deep within him. It was nauseating, but euphoric. He wanted to dance and vomit, strip his clothes from his body and flesh from his muscles, leaving the nerves exposed to feel the cold of the ancient subterranean air, light his screaming flesh on fire with the torches on the wall, climb on the scaled statue in the alcove and allow it to pierce him over and over. And vomit he did. The contents of his stomach emptied onto the floor and Cale fell back against the wall next to the stairway's door. He expected to feel the wrath of the guard, but when he looked over, the tall, shrouded thing was wavering side to side, slightly in tandem with the unheard rhythm, a sight so silently hideous it made him want to be sick again. On nights that the holy twilight revealed itself, when initiations took place and new brothers and sisters of the many-faced worm were added to their ranks, there was always a slight sense of vertigo felt among those in Promise Hold. The acolytes were always told it was the presence of the holy twilight itself, and their understanding of it that made them more connected with their patron inheritor, and therefore feeling his presence. What Cale was feeling now was different. Leaning back against the wall, he felt the waves of vertigo he remembered, but the obscene waking nightmare he'd just experienced left him trembling and unable to move. He waited there for the sensation to subside. The grotesque urges continued to call to him, but he placed his open palms on the stone wall and let himself remain grounded. He tried to lift his hand once and just turn and open the door, but the moment his palm left the cool stone surface, his feet nearly carried him to the lift, where he had the thought to throw himself into it. Everything returned to normal, but he wasn't sure how long it had been. The tall guard became still once more. Cale felt in control of his own limbs. He prepared himself to open the door and run, not stopping until he reached the librarian's office. A creaking noise stopped him. The mechanical sounds of the lift echoed in the chamber, accompanied by the groans of taut, winding ropes. Cale waited. He didn't know why, but he had to. Something was coming up the lift, and he had the sudden realization that the night's ritual was over. He needed to see what came up that lift. The ropes continued their ceaseless complaints for over a minute. 3 shrouded heads were the first thing to peek over the edge of the floor. As the lift rose, a flat, low cart appeared when the figures were at waist height. Multiple bodies were piled on top as though they were simply thrown there haphazardly. One of the Black Gnarl members held a crossbar handle in both hands and began to push, the cart trailing behind them the moment the lift stopped. None of them paid Cale any heed. The grisly procession went past him slowly. Men and women both were heaped naked upon the simple wooden cart, their limbs intertwined with many at seemingly odd angles. The more he looked, the more repulsive things he discovered. Some of the bodies were lacerated, but no blood flowed from the wounds. Some were missing limbs altogether. Others were bruised so badly that barely an inch of unspoiled flesh could be seen. The faces, of course, were the worst. Cale stifled a cry when he saw them. The words of their revered text rang in his ears. The first thing they memorized as acolytes. It came flooding into his mind, forcefully and with a context never before realized. They will feel the force of countless breaths upon their faces, and bask in the haze lest their skin reject the blessing, and melt in rapturous agony like pleasant wax. They will see with 1,000 eyes and be bestowed with eons of forbidden revelations, lest their minds break from the truths and drain from their very resting place. They will sing with the billion strong voices, the symphony of painful promises that resonates in the stars, lest their songs prove weak, so that their jaws break with effort and their throats tear with strain. They will writhe in ecstasy like hellish snakes in their mating ball, as one flesh, lest their bodies prove feeble, and their bones crack and their limbs contort in shame. What lay before him was the result of words he once thought held spiritual and metaphorical meaning. The unspeakable tangle of suffering in front of him was quite literal. Every body on the cart was twisted and desecrated in a uniquely revolting way. Faces melted like candle wax, eyes of all sizes sprouting from cheeks, foreheads, and ears, throats splayed and empty like burned-out tree trunks. Some of them died smiling, often with multiple mouths. There were other wounds that Cale simply refused to reflect on. He saw them once, felt his skin prickle, and let it alone. The 2 other Gnarl members followed the cart to the large door opposite Cale. They opened both doors to allow it passage into the main corridor. Once the cart was through, they released the doors, and Cale watched as all 3 made their way down the hall toward the pit. The doors shut, and all was eerily silent. He pushed the images of the mutilated corpses out of his mind. The lift began operating once more and started lowering to whatever waited beneath the darkness. With what strength he could muster, Cale pushed the door open and left the subfloor behind. The path up the stairs seemed to take longer. He opened the door to the outside air of the hold and breathed deeply. No one else was outside. The sky had few stars out, making even the outside dark and smothering. The gatehouse was still manned, and they let him through. 2 torches flickered by the outbuilding where Cale would deliver the sealed reply in his robes. The symbol of the many-faced worm on the door taunted him. He waited for it to call to him, much like on the lower floors of Promise Hold. Cale walked swiftly to the librarian's office. He knocked and waited. The door creaked open, and Brother Bolthus, obviously having dragged himself out of the bed in the corner of the room, waved him inside. The large man plopped in his seat and rubbed his eyes, waiting wordlessly for Cale to say his piece and leave. "Master Dunscale wants a copy of this letter sent to every master straight away," Cale said in a dull monotone. He tossed the letter on the desk and left without giving Brother Bolthus an opportunity to reply. The night was still and quiet. A slight breeze blew and kissed his face and hands that were left exposed from his robes. Cale went to one of the stairways leading to the upper walls. He looked toward the countryside, but nothing could be seen. The darkness was too deep. The black of the pits below Promise Hold creeped out to devour the lands around it. Cale slumped against one of the parapets and wept. He would have to go back the following night. The lift would take him down to what awaited beneath this former castle, glorious in the old days. Something awaited him down there. He and his fellow acolytes, during the holy twilight that will make them full members of the Black Gnarl, devoted to the many-faced worm. Or it will devour their bodies, minds, and souls in 1,000 unimaginable ways. "I'm sorry," Cale said quietly, gripping his robes in his fists. He apologized to his fellow acolytes whom he studied and bonded with over the years they spent here. He stood and peered out over the night-shrouded landscape before him. The things it held in its shadows were unknown and too many to count. He stared at a future of uncertainty beyond these stone walls. He looked behind him and saw the torchlights of Promise Hold flickering like demonic eyes. He looked back at the soul-flaying truths that had been revealed to him, a future defined by horrors that numbed the mind. Cale tightened his grip on the worn rock of the wall. Drops fell silent and softly against his bare hands. He looked up and saw that clouds had partially covered the moon, casting silver strands across the sky. The rain increased, pattering against the stone as the wind began to pick up. After a few minutes, a full downpour began. Cale glanced back over his shoulder and saw everyone in the courtyard making for the nearest door. The torches hissed against the rain and would soon release their last sigh for the night. He closed his eyes and pulled his hood back, letting the rain course over his face and soak through his hair. "I'm sorry," he repeated. The rain had ceased by the following afternoon. Another ritual was scheduled for that evening. The Order needed all the nameless acolytes in the hold fully initiated and working to further their cause as soon as possible. When one of the nameless couldn't be located, a few of the newest initiates were sent to find him. They looked in the storerooms and dormitories, in every dark corner they could find. They pitied him already. Not only would he be denied initiation at this point, but also severely punished, and the deep pit from which the cries and moans wafted up on rank winds immediately came to mind. The final place the initiates checked were the walls. They figured they should have seen him, but perhaps they missed him tucked away against one of the towers. The parapets were narrow, forcing them to walk one in front of the other. The initiate in the lead stopped so suddenly that the one in the rear bumped into him. "What is it?" the rear initiate asked, annoyed. The lead grabbed the side of the wall, still cold and wet from the rain, and looked over the edge. Their head was pointed further out, looking into the muddy field at first, then slowly angled down to the very bottom of the wall. At the base of the wall, a puddle had formed in a thin line all along the perimeter. Directly below the initiate was a bundle of robes, crumpled, empty, and soaked through. A trail of footprints in the mud-slit ground led away from the abandoned robes all the way to the nearby trees, where they disappeared into the forest.